stimați profesori, după cum ne-a promis excelența sa, ambasadorul Statelor Americii, domnul Pettit, a revenit la noi peste o an. Probabil mirosul asta de ilea care are ceva care n-a putut, nu l-a putut face pe domnul excelența sa să nu revină la noi. Ne bucurăm că l-avem astăzi în fața noastră. Astăzi vom vorbi despre democrație. Astăzi vom vorbi despre Statele Unite ale Americii. Astăzi vom vorbi despre procesele care au loc la nivel global. Astăzi, bineînțeles, ne vom referi și la Republica Moldova. Este interesant tema care ne-a fost propusă, ne-a fost sugerată de excelența sa, alegerile prezidențiale 2016 din Statele Unite ale Americii. America a oferit permanent lumii modele. În teoria democrației, cei care știu, știu. Sunt două abordări, pornind de la Sartori. Este o abordare care pornește de la factori de ordin rațional și factori de ordin rezonabil. Este recunoscut că Statele Unite ale Americii a pornit varianta lucrurilor rezonabile. Noi, europenii, am văzut în acele rezonabile mult rațional și am încercat să le împrumutăm, să le luăm, să le implementăm la noi. Din păcate, nu de fiecare dată, cele împrumutate s-au așezat bine peste contextul în care ne aflam noi la un moment dat. Și atunci spuneam că este vinovat modelul, sunt vinovați americani, până ca să dăm seama că multe ori probabil vina este în noi. Acestea fiind spuse, îmi face deosebită plăcere să oferă cuvântul excelenței sale. În conferința sa, după cum convenisem și cum am spus, domnul ambasador se va referi la campania electorală din Statele Americii a alegerilor prezidențiale 2016, campanie care își ia având, o campanie care noi o urmărim, care prezintă foarte mare interes și probabil în ceea ce se întâmplă în Statele Unite ale Americii putem să decupăm și o tendință care o observăm și o constatăm și la nivel global. Bine, îmi face plăcere încă o dată să ofer cuvântul excelenței sale, ca mai apoi să trecem la runda de întrebări și răspunsuri. Vă rog, excelență.
Bună dimineața tuturor! Can you all hear me? Da? Without? Fără microfon sau cu microfon?
E bine, e bun.
Okay. We're going to speak English this morning. This is good practice for all of you. I will try to speak clearly. Toți înțelegeți, da? Okay, very good. Dean Sholkan, faculty members, students, this is my second time here at the university. It is always for me a great pleasure and also a little bit of an adventure, especially when I take questions because I never know what you're going to ask. But I think the question and answer period is the most important, and I want everyone to feel free to ask any question you want without restrictions. It doesn't have to be politically correct. I think a lot of people, including in my country, have a lot of questions about the presidential elections that we're having. It has turned out to be quite a spectacle. And it's interesting that our elections coincide more or less with your own presidential elections here in Moldova, so maybe we can even draw a little bit of a comparison. Politics are always complicated, and I arrived here January of last year. I've already been through 4 governments here in Moldova. Hopefully we'll have some political stability now, we'll see, but things never stay the same. Things are always changing in politics. You've probably seen news coverage of our election in the United States. Now with the internet, you can watch all of our debates. I think, like many Americans, people like to watch the debates between the candidates because they can be very entertaining. They're a very popular subject on our comedy shows. Usually after every debate, we have professional comedians come and they reenact the debate, and you realize that there is a lot of stuff that can be very entertaining. Voting is an important part of any democratic process. It's very important to vote. Some people say, well, my vote doesn't matter. It's not going to change anything. That's not true. It's all you have is the vote. And who you vote for and what party you support can have very important results. It gives citizens the opportunity to decide who's going to lead your government. It also gives a very strong message to the political class on what the citizens want and what policies and what issues are most important to the citizens. So, all democracies share these universal values, but the system of elections varies greatly from country to country. Both our history as a nation and our Constitution have contributed to creating some very unique features in the electoral process in the United States. Every 4 years, on the first Tuesday of November, American voters go to elect a president. The election process, though, begins much earlier, sometimes as much as 2 years earlier, as people start to come out and decide whether they're going to be candidates or not. Sometimes they tease the public. They don't actually say specifically that they're going to run, but most people have their suspicions a few months out or a year out as to who's going to participate. As you know, we have two main political parties in the United States. We have the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Our Democratic Party is not the same as your Democratic Party. We have had many candidates running for the Republican Party nomination this year. They include the famous Donald Trump, John Kasich, and Ted Cruz. They are all still in the race. And we have two candidates running for the Democratic Party, and that's Hillary Clinton, who used to be the Secretary of State, but was also the wife of President Clinton, and Bernie Sanders. So I've actually, maybe you've watched more of the debates than I have. I never can seem to find the time, but I usually am able to see the highlights, what the important parts of the debates were. Each party holds what they call primary elections in every state. We have 50 states. Every state holds a primary election. And they either do it through traditional election or through something that's very local that they call a caucus at the community level. During the primary elections, citizens have the chance to vote for the person they would like to be the candidate for the party. It's a little different from here, where you have the party and you have the party lists. In the United States, the citizens, if they registered with the party, they can vote directly for who they want to represent the party. This gives average citizens a voice in who the party candidate will be in the presidential election. In July, after every state has had their primaries, their party primaries, then the two main parties hold what they call a convention. And so you have the Republican convention and you have the Democratic convention. At this convention, each party will nominate the candidate. Often it's just a formality, but sometimes when the race is very close, you're not sure who's going to be chosen as a candidate. And that's the person who will run for the election in November. What makes America's primary process unique is that the party's candidates, again, are chosen by the people and not by the party leadership. As a result, some candidates who no one knows can often gain popularity during the primary process and actually become the candidate. For example, when President Barack Obama began his first presidential campaign in 2007, very few people knew him. He wasn't well known, and even in the party, I don't think people considered him necessarily a serious candidate. But through the primary process, he was able to gain a lot of popularity. And we all know he won the Democratic nomination and he won the presidential election. But democracy goes well beyond the electoral process. It's very important in any election for citizens to be well informed. That means listening to different opposing views and not just to the views that you agree with. I think in this country and a lot of other countries, everybody knows, depending upon what television station you're listening to, what their political view is. So you shouldn't just watch Jornal TV and you shouldn't just watch Publica. You should watch both. You should watch to see what the different opinions are. It's very important to be informed, and it's very important to know the issues, and the debates which we televise are a very good way to see where the candidates stand on issues. Over the last 3 months, we've seen a lot of very lively debates on American television. Each candidate has the task of trying to seem different from the other candidates. Sometimes they all sound the same, so I think that encourages them to say outrageous things so that people will remember, and it will distinguish them from their competitors. Television's played a very important role now for a half century. In the first televised presidential debate in the United States was in 1960, and that was between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. This debate had a tremendous impact, not only on the American public, but on the world, and I think that television debates became very popular after that. Now, to foreigners and to many Americans, the race for the White House sometimes it seems crazy, sometimes it seems offensive, and some people don't understand it at all. There's always been a bit of chaos. Democracy is not always pretty. If you want things to be pretty, then you need a dictatorship, but in democracy, it's not always pretty. And as I said, part of our democratic tradition is comedy. So a lot of people learn about the political issues by watching comedy shows. Another important factor in any election is the press and the media. Elections are sometimes won or lost on national television. Television has a tremendous impact. Some historians think that Kennedy won in 1960 over Nixon because he just was better looking and more charming, and Nixon was sweating the whole time in the debate, possibly. In presidential elections, it isn't always about defense and foreign policy. A lot of times what people really care about are the economy. I think that's true in Moldova as well, and which is why we have the saying that all politics are local. People care about their day-to-day lives, and those issues are very important. It's very common for candidates to travel all over the United States. Our country is very, very big, so it's a lot of travel. You can imagine I haven't been to all 50 states, but the presidential candidates usually try to get there because they want to influence the party votes there. Candidates will go to Detroit, for example, and they'll talk about the automobile industry. And then they'll go to Iowa, which is my state, and they'll talk about corn and agriculture. They always have to target their message to the audience. Every election is an opportunity to change the political course and to address issues that might be new, that weren't around before. It's really my hope that this election in November, which I think is going to be very important for my country, that there's a lot of participation, and the youth vote, people your age voting, can have a tremendous impact on the election results. So I also ask you all, when you have your presidential elections in October, very important to participate. No matter, even if you've given up hope on your government, the only way you'll change it is if you help choose the leaders. It's not easy, but democracy is a very important thing, and it's something that we all need to take seriously. So I'm going to keep this speech short because I'm not sure everybody's following me, but I think most of you are. I can usually tell by looking at your faces if you understand or not. But I've given you a very brief overview of our election process. That's the subject today. If you have questions on some of the details, please feel free to ask, but you can also ask anything in terms of, you know, where's the United States going? Where's Moldova going? How are relations? How do we see issues in Europe and here in the region? These are all fair questions to discuss. I think you're all very smart people. A lot of you are involved directly in international affairs. So this is an opportunity. I'm representing the United States of America here for you to ask some questions. And so on that note, I thank you again, Dean, for the opportunity to speak to these students, and I am ready to take questions.
Trecem neplăcit la runda de întrebări și răspunsuri. Dați să înțelegem, întrebările puteți spune în engleză, română sau rusă. Excelența sa va răspunde în limba în care va considera că ar fi bine să dea răspunsul și dacă cineva are o întrebare și ar vrea să fie răspunsul în rusă, pentru că mai bine înțelege, îi poate sugera domnului ambasador.
Și limba română, eu vorbesc română, dacă doriți.
Așa, deci trecem imediat la runda de întrebări și răspunsuri. Da, rog, Cina.
And I'm studying international relations, so I'm very interested about the way these presidential elections have been progressing. And I think one of the main reasons why the whole world is so interested in following the election is because the United States has the most important traditions in presidential democratic elections and also in democratic values. And since the United States has taken upon itself to be a promoter of these democratic values, the world puts a lot of pressure on the United States and follows every move. And these elections have been very interesting for us because there have been some moments and some candidates that have created many controversies. And I think you already followed what I'm trying to say. I'm interested how such a country like America, who has very deep-rooted traditions in democracy, also shows so much support for the behaviors of some candidates who can be seen as atrocious, and especially of the Minister of Trump's.
Thank you. That's a very good question. And some of it just has to do with psychology. Americans are very proud of their political system. We're very proud of our Constitution, which is well over 200 years old. It is a document that for us is something holy and revered. And no matter whether you're on the extreme left or the extreme right, all Americans agree that the Constitution is the most sacred thing to us and is the foundation of our government. However, the Constitution is paper. It doesn't account for human behavior. It doesn't account for what happens in the world and prejudices. So a lot of people are worried because they see candidates in our elections who seem very extreme and who seem to have extreme ideological views. And they worry because, after all, it's the United States. It's a huge economic and military power, and they worry about how it will affect foreign relations. I think you're seeing a little bit of this phenomenon in Europe as well. A lot of governments are turning to the right because of fears about immigration. And this will sound like propaganda, but it really comes from the heart. I honestly think that the American people will make the correct decision in the end. And if we do get someone who isn't exactly in the center but might be a little extreme, our system only allows them to do so much. We still have our laws, we still have our Constitution, we still have our Congress, and so I don't worry too much. I think it's just a reflection of a lot of unhappiness in my country as well as elsewhere about The economy, most of all. People always worry about the economy. They like to blame immigrants for that. There's more tension between us now, between my country and the Russian Federation now. There's all sorts of problems in the Middle East with Syria and Iran. So it makes people look for someone who says things that sometimes that appeal to their fears rather than to their brains. And, but our system is very old, it's very carefully structured, and so even someone who might be a little different from what we've had before can only take the country so far to the left or to the right. Okay.
Cum ne-am înțeles, puteți spuneți întrebări care nu țin numai de procesul electoral, alegeri prezidențiale din Statele Americii. Putem pune întrebări legate de politica internațională, relațiile internaționale, de realitățile, procesul politic. Să avem o opinie, punctul de vedere a excelenței sale asupra proceselor politice din Republica Moldova. Vă rog. Da.
Well, first of all, thank you for visiting our faculty again. My name is Igor Shopin, second year studies international relations, and my question is about the presidential elections in the USA. First of all, if Democrats win these elections, will the attitude of Hillary Clinton towards the Russia-USA relations affect somehow international stability? Because it seems to me that Hillary Clinton is very pessimistic about these relations, and she will try to keep again the oppression of Russian Federation in the context of Ukraine crisis, in the context of Syrian conflict, and so on. Thank you for attention.
Thank you for the question. I think all of the candidates share some concerns about our relationship with the Russian Federation. Hillary Clinton, of course, is an experienced diplomat, so she has a lot of experience dealing with these global issues. Our relationship with Russia right now is complicated because, on the one hand, we feel that the Russian government and specifically President Putin have done things that violate international standards by taking Crimea, by participating in the invasion of eastern Ukraine. So that concerns us a lot. We see that as affecting the global security and regional security. But at the same time, Russia is a very important partner. They're on the Security Council. They were important in reaching an agreement with Iran on nuclear proliferation. They are important in their involvement in Syria. So we work with them in a business-like fashion. And we also recognize that Russia feels threatened by the enlargement of NATO. And so, even though it was not our intention to threaten Russia, we've always thought that the greatest threat is in the Middle East, not Russia. But we understand there's also a lot of psychology there as well. I think Hillary Clinton, being an experienced diplomat, is concerned about Russia, but I also think she sees things very globally. Some of the other candidates who don't have experience in international affairs are probably looking more locally, so they're thinking more about the economy and that sort of thing.
Da, mulțumim. Da, vă rog.
Bună ziua.
Eu vă mulțumesc că ați venit la noi la universitate. Eu am o întrebare nu referitor la lege. Am vrut să vă întreb care este părerea dumneavoastră despre țara noastră. Atât personal, cum vă pare Republica Moldova? Care este părerea unei persoane care nu este cetățean, care vine din altă țară, din altă societate, de alte principii, alte idei, alte valori? Care a fost prima dumneavoastră impresie despre Republica Moldova? Și cum vă pare la moment? Care este actual părerea dumneavoastră?
Thank you. My impressions of Moldova as a country have always been very, very positive. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a diplomat. I like Moldova very much. And as a matter of fact, everyone I talk to at the embassy and Americans who visit all love Moldova. It's a beautiful country. The people are exceptionally friendly and hospitable. The weather is good. The wine is good. And the people are very smart. The people are generally well educated. I'm old enough that I worked in the USSR, and it was very different in the countries I was in then. Russia. I never came to Moldova until I came here as ambassador. So I'm very optimistic because I see your generation. I talk to other people who are very smart. We had a conference yesterday for IT. I think IT has a lot of potential here in Moldova. I think the biggest problem now is an inheritance from the Soviet Union, which is widespread corruption and a political class that does not always seem to care about the interests of the people. That said, the new government, and it is new, we have to see how they do. They are doing reforms. I think they're doing a lot of these reforms under pressure because they want to get an IMF agreement and they want to have financial budget support. But whatever the reason, those reforms are going to be good for the people of Moldova. And so I think we have to be optimistic and hope that these reforms will continue. It's not unique to Moldova. The problems we have here politically and economically, we can see in many areas, but I will say that there is absolutely no reason for Moldova to be the poorest country in Europe. With all of the potential that it has, it should be doing much better economically. And I think if the economy in Moldova improves, that a lot of the other problems people worry about, including things like corruption, including people having to leave the country to look for jobs elsewhere, that will get better. That will be resolved.
Da, mulțumesc. Eu cred că dacă vrei să complaci și să auzi cuvinte frumoase, să întrebi un ambasador străin ce crede despre țara ta. Da, un ambasador în mod special. Vă mulțumim foarte mult. Știu că sunteți sinceri și ne-ați uimit. Chiar dragostea dumneavoastră față de Moldova a venit înainte de a veni aici. Am văzut spotul ceala când v-ați adresat într-o română bună poporului nostru și a fost foarte frumos. Da, vă rog.
Thank you very much again for visiting our university. I'm Statelor, second year's students of international relations. And if you speak about political system, all of us know what political system in USA is one of the best in the world. And in comparison with our political systems, especially what in USA it's just two political parties, and here we have a lot of political parties, over 40. And I think what this creates more conflicts and also can establish more and more our political situation. Maybe Mr. Ambasador can give an advice for us how to solve a little this situation.
You're right that we have a two-party system, although our law permits any number of parties, and usually there are other parties that put forward candidates, but traditionally it's always been the Republicans or Democrats. The system here with many, many different parties is a very European system. It's different from the American system, but it's still a form of democracy. The difficulty here is that because there's so many parties, they have to form a coalition. And that requires a lot of negotiation and a lot of compromise. My European colleagues tell me that that's very democratic when you have different parties who have to negotiate. I think it is very democratic. It's maybe easier in the United States just having two parties, but on the other hand, sometimes people want a variety of choices. So it's, I wouldn't say one system is better than the other system, but I think the problem here in Moldova is not the structure. It's not the structure, it's not the system. Moldova has plenty of laws, it has plenty of state institutions. The problem is that the people who run those institutions too often are more concerned about their own personal interests rather than the interests of the people. That's very hard to change. You can't change that with the law. You can only change that with a change in the psychology of the political class. And that takes time. It takes a lot of time, and it might require a new generation.
Mulțumim. Vă rog, întrebări? Da, vă rog.
My name is Nick. I'm a second year student. We know that Donald Trump is about to win the Republican nomination. if he wins the presidentials, will be this a turning point for the U.S. foreign policy?
It's very hard to predict. First of all, I don't know that he will win the Republican at the Republican convention. It seems like every day he says something that shocks more people, but for all the people that he shocks, there are other people who like what he says. So we'll see. It is certainly possible. It is possible that Donald Trump could become our next president. And as I said, in our system, if he's the president, he's the president, and I will represent his administration, but most of all, I represent the American people. We have our Constitution, and we have a lot of other, we have our Congress that will keep the United States on a certain path. I don't think it's going to go one way or the other. And another thing I've noticed about politicians is that when they're campaigning, they say one thing, but when they're actually in the office and they have to solve all the problems that they talk about, they become a lot more reasonable.
Hello, thank you, Your Excellency, for coming to us. So, my name is Ambasador. I'm the first year of international relations. I have kind of personal question, but don't get to personal details. We don't need that. I have learned that your wife is an ambassador as well in Latvia. So I would like to know what is to have such a diplomatic family, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of family. Thank you.
That's a very good question. It came as a big surprise to us. We didn't know she was going to be an ambassador, but I knew I was going to be an ambassador, so we tried very hard to find we were trying to find her another job in the region because our law doesn't permit her to work for me. I can't, my wife cannot work for me. So she couldn't work here in Moldova. So we said, well, maybe you can be a deputy or something in another embassy in Eastern Europe. And so she was trying to find something like that, and the ambassador in Latvia left early. And at that time, my wife was the head of the Western European office at the State Department, so they took her. So it was kind of a shock. It's not the first time. There have been 5 times where there's been a husband and wife who are ambassadors, and it just turned out that way. It's hard. I've been married 35 years, so it's very hard for us to be apart. I just visited her last weekend, and so we try to see each other. But sometimes we compare, you know, Latvia, it's interesting because it's also a former Soviet republic, but they're in the EU, they're in NATO, so it's very different what she deals with. But you know, Latvia also has a lot of the same problems Moldova has, and a lot of that is also from the Soviet legacy. But it is interesting, and our family and friends don't believe it, but yes, we are both ambassadors, so there you have it.
Mulțumim. Vă rog, întrebări. Sunt întrebări. S-au epuizat, vă rog? Nu ezitați, spuneți. Mai vreți să spuneți o întrebare? Da, vă rog.
Okay, so about president elections. So we know what is Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And also I've heard what when was elected Barack Obama, it was people start to talk what this is again another proof what USA is the most democratic country in the world, and that's is not racism there. So if Hillary Clinton will win, so this will be the first woman president in USA history. And also, what chance Miss Hillary Clinton have to win? Because I know what a lot of people are not agree with Donald Trump because they have a little different behavior.
Yeah. I don't know who will win. But you're right that the fact that we elected an African American president surprised much of the world and shows how far American society has progressed. in really a small number of years. I actually would have thought that a woman would be elected before an African American would be elected. So if Hillary Clinton is elected, that would certainly be more evidence. I remember on the day before President Obama was elected, a lot of the press, much of it the Russian press, said, Nikogda, that will never happen because America is too racist. They will never elect. This was in Pravda and Izvestia and Komsomolska Pravda. All the newspapers said that. And then the next day, and I think it surprised a lot of people. So we're very proud. It shows our society has progressed. But you know, the United States is also changing demographically. They're, because of immigration and because of a lot of things, and because of the civil rights that have developed in my lifetime for minorities, we're a much more diverse country. And diversity is good, and it directly applies to Moldova, because Moldova is also diverse. Moldova has people speaking many languages, many ethnic groups, and it's very important for everybody to feel included.
Da, mulțumim. Da, vă rog.
Thank you for coming again. And my name is Gribaldi Victoria. I'm a second-year student at the International Relations, and I'd like to ask you a question regarding the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. As well know, it is still discussed. The negotiations are going on, yet it is predicted that a final agreement would be reached up till the 2019-2020. How do you think? Is it possible to reach an agreement before that?
There are a lot of factors involved in that, and I'm certainly not an expert, but it does show a trend to try for globalization of the economy and having free trade areas. We've had one in North America for a long time with NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the European market, being the largest in the world now, is obviously very attractive to the United States, but the U.S. market is also very attractive to Europe. I think what's real important now and what's real critical is that the EU, which is really an experiment, it's a political, economic, social experiment, is facing some real challenges right now. There's the threat of the UK leaving the EU. There's the crisis they're facing now with immigration, and so sometimes that causes concern about the market, and but there are a lot of details that have to be worked out on the transatlantic trade program, and it's something that Washington's very interested in. I don't know what all of the details are in terms of reaching an agreement, so I can't really tell you 2018, 2019, how long it will take. It all depends upon working out many details. And I've discovered that any time you try to introduce a new trade regime, there's usually, like the association agreement, it's usually like this. So it takes a long time to reach agreement.
Vă mulțumesc. Am și eu o întrebare. Iată, astăzi guvernul Filip face 100 de zile. Care este opinia noastră, punctul noastră de vedere, asupra activității guvernului, a reușitelor, probabil și a unor lucruri care v-au dezamăgit, poate văzute din Ambasada Statelor Unite ale Americii? Vă rog.
It's always very difficult for me to talk about the government here, because if I say anything positive, then I get criticized for supporting, whatever. They'll say supporting oligarchs, supporting thieves, where's the billion, and all this. And they'll say that it's the fault of the United States and the fault of the EU that we support this government instead of supporting the people. So I've always made it very clear that we deal with this government because that's what we have to do. We can't be criticized for having relations with the government. And I've talked to Prime Minister Philippe and I talked to his cabinet. I will say they all seem to be very smart, very intelligent people who are very interested in reforms. And so as long as they do reforms, we will be happy that they are doing reforms. In terms of how the government came to power or whether this government really represents the people of Moldova, I think it's probably still too early to see. I think they've made progress in a lot of reform areas so far, but it's not. I'm the only, well, except for my colleagues over here, we're the only people in this room who really should not have an opinion on the government because we do not participate in the elections. That is up to you. And with people, if people are disappointed in the government or disappointed with its accomplishments, the only way to change that is through elections.
Thank you very much. My name is Igor Zafarov. I'm a first-year student in international relations. Actually, I have two questions for you. First of all, I think you are an American, and after that, you are an ambassador of the United States. And I was wondering about the American spirit. And despite different beliefs, despite different social backgrounds, religious backgrounds, citizens of the United States know how to share a common vision of what it's to be an American. Maybe do you have some advice for us? How can we be more united as the nation? And my second question is about the president election here in Moldova. We are always debating at the lesson which is the best process to elect the president, by the parliament or by the people. How do you think, and what is your opinion about these constitutional changes here? Thank you. Okay.
That's a very good, I like your first question a lot because you're talking about how do you unify the country. I think a problem that the Republic of Moldova has that makes it a little different from the Baltics or even Ukraine is that it's somewhat of an artificial country. Someone drew a border with mostly Bessarabia, Bukovina, and said, okay, this is now Moldova, this is a country, and as a result, you have Russian speakers in Transnistria, you have Gagauz in the south, you have Roma, you have Russian speakers, you have Ukrainian speakers, you have Romanian speakers. And so it's very important to create a Moldovan identity and to understand what it means to be Moldovan. And to be Moldovan does not mean to speak Romanian, and it doesn't mean to speak Russian. It's a mix, just like the United States. I mean, Americans, we don't even know. I mean, my last name is French, but nobody in my family knows anyone who's French, or they don't even know why we have a last name that's French. And that's typical of Americans, because what unites Americans is our history and our culture. But our culture is made up of many different people. So it's very, very important for Moldovans to decide, is this a country? Are we Moldovans in the true sense of the word? Sometimes people say, well, I speak Moldovan. I don't even really know what that means. But it's very important to identify what it means to be Moldovan. On the presidential elections, I'm already on record, even though, again, I should never have an opinion on anything political in Moldova, but I think that the system of parliamentary election compared to direct election by the people, I think it's very easy to say that direct election is more democratic. It also solves the problem of instability. If you need 61 votes in the parliament to elect the president, we've already seen that governments fall because of this. That's not good for the country. So I think that this is a step forward. It'll be very interesting to see who will be president, because it could very well be someone who is not part of the current political grouping, which might provide balance.
Hello, Mr. James. So I'm very honored to see you here. And I want to ask, beside the expression who I heard here that America is the most democratic country in the world, I want to ask you about spring democracy, what is happening, what was happened in front of the U.S. Capitol. And I checked news, and they were saying that it was in over of 400 arrests. How you can comment it, and what it means? What does it mean to your country? Because in back of this protest was a good statement: one person, one vote.
Well, my country has had protests always. It's one of our rights. As a matter of fact, it's in our Constitution, the right of peaceful assembly and the right to protest to the government. So it's not a new phenomenon, and the particular issue of one person, one vote relates to a decision by our Supreme Court a few years ago, which that had to do with well, unless I'm mistaken, a lot of this had to do with campaign contributions. Who can contribute money to political campaigns? And there are limits. There are limits because they don't want you know, our oligarchs to be able to pay for election results. And the Supreme Court decided that they could treat corporations and companies the same way they would treat a private citizen. This was a very, very controversial ruling, and some people said that a corporation is not a person. But that is the ruling of our Supreme Court. A lot of people don't like that. They think they think money plays too much of a role in political campaigns. We do have a lot of laws regulating how much money a person can contribute. It all has to be transparent. If you go on the internet, you can put in someone's name and it'll show how much they contributed to an election. But I think that was, there were other issues too that they had. I think that it made the news because, I don't know, they don't have Ben & Jerry's. Have you heard of Ben & Jerry's? That's a big ice cream company that is known that is very famous in the United States. And the two owners of that company were also arrested. Now, why were they arrested? Were they arrested for demonstrating? No. They were arrested for not obeying the police, because the police have to make sure that it's, you know, this is our Congress after all, so we have security concerns. The police have to make sure that people are respecting the law and that they're doing it peacefully. So I don't know all the details, but I am sure that they will be, you know, their case will be heard, and what you want to avoid is you never want someone to be punished for political reasons.
Mulțumim. Da, vă rog.
Bună ziua și îmi pare bine să vă revăd. Vă rog frumos, enumerați 3 instrumente de influență a politicului nostru pe care țara dumneavoastră o produce țării noastre.
3 instruments of power to influence. Is that what you're saying? To influence? For my country to influence your country. Is it? I'm into this.
Used by the United States in Republic of Moldova, the instruments of power of the United States that it used in Republic of Moldova.
Am înțeles. Ok. De la început. Well, I think the information and media are a very important instrument of power. I think we see it, the Russians have been very successful with it, with their propaganda. We also try to do a lot of messaging. We use social media, we use our news, we use events like this for me, so that would certainly be one of them. Another instrument of, I don't like to say instrument of power, instrument of influence is our foreign assistance. And that has to do not only with providing funding for development of Moldova's economy, but also for providing training and experts to help the Moldovan government learn how to operate in a sort of European and democratic fashion. So that's 2. I guess 3 in terms of our overall influence in the world is the example that we give the world. In other words, eventually people are going to judge the United States by its behavior. And that, of course, is harder because we can't always control our behavior. But I think there are still a lot of people in the world who look at the United States and say, okay, well, that's a good example to follow. All right.
Vă rog, ați spus mai mult să întrebați, da, vă rog? Vă rog mai tare.
I don't hear.
Mă numesc Alina, am Slovacia și am o întrebare la dumneavoastră în legătură cu, cred că cunoașteți situația care s-a format între judecători de Republica Moldova și Pettit Statelor, când a fost acuzat de neprofesionalism. Pettit Statelor pentru că a comentat un caz privind un primar din Republica Moldova care a fost demis din cauza că a dat niște fonduri. Dumneavoastră, dacă mirați într-o situație în care un judecător din Republica Moldova va acuza de nu asemenea de neprofesionalism, cum ați fi reacționat?
I know we're talking about judges. Is that judecător?
Yes.
And what I just don't, I didn't understand all of it.
Mayors, and in case somebody would criticize you, how would you?
We always get criticized when we criticize the government, so I don't do it very often. But from time to time, we do criticize the government if we think they're doing something that is egregiously wrong and undemocratic. And in the case of the mayor of Taraklia, who has very good relations with the EU and with my government, we work with Taraklia on a lot of local governance issues. I represent my government. We're allowed to express our opinion. And so I did it on our website. But first the EU did it, Pirkka Tapiola, Ambassador Tapiola, and they said that this looks very bad. Someone who, it was all about cutting down trees. What happened is that the city council of Taraklia, there were some trees that were dead. You understand what I'm saying? That were dead, okay? The kopachuscats, I think is what's. And it was dangerous. Era periculos. So the decision by the city council was to chop down the trees. And then the court says, this is terrible, you cut down trees, you can no longer be mayor for 2 years. That's not democratic because the mayor was elected by the people of the city of Taraklia, and we thought that that was an example of what we've seen happening too much here in Moldova, which is that the political parties in power are trying to consolidate power also at the local level. We think that's a very dangerous trend. And could I just add, and people criticize the United States all the time, and they are welcome to do so.
My name is Maria Anatoly. Thank you for coming here. I have a question. In your opinion, nowadays we have a democratic system in the Republic of Moldova when all democratic institutions are captured by a Moldavian oligarch.
Is that a statement or a question?
Question.
Are you asking me if I think that the state is captured by one oligarch?
No, my question is if we have nowadays a democratic system.
I think the system is democratic. The structure of the government, and your constitution, and your laws, and it's all a democratic model. What happens in a democracy, though, is that if people act in a non-democratic way, and there's no way to control that behavior, then the system collapses. The system doesn't work well. So what the Republic of Moldova has to do is make sure that its institutions are operating correctly. If judges are making decisions that are based on bribes or for political reasons, they're not functioning the way they're supposed to function, and that is undemocratic. If one person controls key state institutions, that is also undemocratic. So the system is democratic. The functioning of the system is not always democratic. Din păcate.
First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for coming today. My name is Afanasi Eugen. I am a first-year master's student at Diplomacy Studies. My question is the following. You know very well that currently it is election process before the election of UN Secretary General. And Natalia German is a candidate for Moldova for this election. My first question is, what are the chances for Natalia German to become UN Secretary General? And the second question is, if United States supports this candidate. Thank you.
Well, I personally have great respect for Natalia German. I've dealt with her for about a year when she was foreign minister. I think she's fairly well regarded here in Moldova. Her father was the first president. And I think she has a lot of things in her favor. The selection of the Secretary General of the UN is a very complicated process, and we're only one vote. But I do know that unofficially, informally, they try to select individuals from different parts of the world. And right now, it is my understanding that the plan for the next Secretary General is that it be someone from Eastern Europe. So that's one advantage. I think there's also interest in having a woman as Secretary General, so that's another advantage. So then the other question is, what will the UN members, and in particular the Security Council Permanent 5 members, it will be very important that, that she be able to please, for example, the Americans, but also the Russians and the Chinese. So I think the fact that she, for example, speaks Russian, I think the Russians like that. Again, she's well regarded by myself, and she knows people in Washington, but I don't know. I don't know what her chances are. There's a lot of competition, but I think she does have a lot of advantages. I think it would be remarkable if a Moldovan became the next Secretary General of the United Nations.
Mulțumim. Da, Maria, vă rog.
European Union, and what would be the impact of this decision for relations between the USA and United Europe?
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about the discussion in the EU right now to require visas for American citizens?
No,
you're talking about visa liberalization for Moldovan citizens to travel to Europe?
No, for citizens of European Union, because it's in discussion, the decision, and this decision about the citizens of Romania.
Okay, okay. Because most citizens of the EU already have visa-free travel to the United States. The only countries in the EU that do not are Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. I believe those are the three. The EU is discussing currently on the basis of reciprocity whether that's acceptable. My country's immigration laws are country by country. So they look at things. They look at the security of the passport, the travel patterns of the people. Do they tend to, do they respect the immigration laws, and do they leave after when they're supposed to leave? And so there are a lot of factors that go into it. And what they look at is they look at Poland and Romania and Bulgaria, and they look at the travel patterns of the citizens. And those countries are newer arrivals to the EU, so they don't have the same, they don't meet the same qualifications as the other European countries. So this idea that the EU, you know, the EU is not a country, it's an alliance. If they're going to require the United States to treat the EU as a country, that's contrary to our laws. So right now we have this impasse, and I think that it would be a disaster if the EU required visas for American citizens to go to Europe. First of all, it would be terrible for tourism, and I don't think that the European embassies have enough people to handle the visa applications. So it's something that's being discussed. I'm sure they will find a compromise, but the United States treats every country separately on its own merits.
Da, mulțumim. Da.
My name is Leila, and I would like to thank you one more time for coming.
As we know, international community just couldn't ignore Russia's violation of international law in the situation with Ukraine, but actually my question is going to be about Kosovo. As we know, Kosovo's obtaining of independence was also a unilateral decision, what also is a violation of international law. But in case with Kosovo, Kosovo obtained a lot of support from other countries, and actually my question is, what is so special in this situation with Kosovo?
Okay. That question often comes up with relation to Crimea, for example. But I think what we have to understand is the historical precedent. After the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, the map of Europe changed completely. Instead of the USSR, we have 15 new countries. Instead of Yugoslavia, we had maybe seven. Okay, 7 new countries. So that happened, and in the case of Germany, we went from 2 to 1. So the map of Europe changed. The whole world acknowledged this. Nobody's suggesting that the USSR now is one country, even if that might be President Putin's desire, and Yugoslavia is what it is. Kosovo was simply the last step of what unfortunately was a very bloody, very violent struggle. In the case of Kosovo, there were massive killings of citizens, massive killing of citizens, to such a degree that people were comparing it to what happened in World War II. That's why NATO participated in military action against Serbia. So that was all at a specific time in history when the map of Europe was being completely changed. So Kosovo is not a precedent. Kosovo was simply the most recent, at that time, of a new country emerging from all of this conflict and all of this changing of borders. Now that we're in the 21st century, the international community thinks it's very important to respect borders. And what happened with Crimea was a violation of that, taking territory from a neighbor. And for that matter, what's happening in the Donbass, despite the denial of the Russian side, that was a Russian military action. There was an uprising in Donbass because of people who felt that they weren't part of the Ukrainian society because of language, but they would not have been able to do it without the involvement of the Russians. So that's my explanation on Kosovo.
Da, vă mulțumesc, da, vă rog.
Bună ziua, mersi că ați venit la noi. Întrebarea noastră, a mea personală, este deoarece suntem la masterat și avem mai multe întrebări de dezvoltarea Republicii Moldova și relațiile noastre cu țara care reprezentați. Dar în dezvoltarea localităților, știu că totdeauna aveți proiecte, totdeauna susțineți dezvoltarea satelor și a problemelor de la sate. Care este acum impactul noastră asupra acestor localități?
O precizare, da, excelență, doamna este primara unei localități de raionul Strășeni.
Pare bine.
Masteranda noastră.
You will like my answer because we very much support the development of local authorities. We think that local authorities play a very, very important role in any democracy, including here in Moldova. And as you know, there is also a project for decentralization so that there will be more power and more budgetary support to mayors and heads of rayons. Because what happens is when everything's centralized, it's too much like Gosplan, right? You need, so the mayors and the rayon heads, they understand what the problems of their citizens are, and it's more efficient and it's more democratic for them to have that authority. I also think that in general here in the Republic of Moldova, the reputation of local authorities is much, much higher than central authorities. I think about 2 months ago I went to the Congress of Local Authorities, and I've learned that in the opinion polls in the Republic of Moldova, local authorities are always rated much, much higher than central authorities. So we very much support decentralization, and we very much support giving some budgetary authority to local officials.
Vă mulțumim, mă uit că s-au încins publicul întrebările, mai luăm o întrebare, două, vă spun că deja timpul nostru expiră. Da, de mai mult timp stați cu mâna ridicată, vă rog.
Well, it's certainly probably one of the most important problems and challenges facing the EU right now. This is a very large movement of people, and it's always difficult to absorb refugees, but there are also security concerns about the refugees coming in. My country has been dealing with massive immigration for much of its history. Particularly across our southern border, we have thousands and thousands. The estimate in the United States is probably over 12 million illegal, undocumented immigrants in the United States. But we're a much larger country. And we're also a country that absorbs immigrants. That's why nobody says I'm French or German or Spanish, because usually we don't know where we're from unless we're recent immigrants. And in American culture, we pride ourselves on being accepting. I think a lot of our European partners feel the same way. They say, we need to do the right thing. These are human beings with families. They left not because they want a better life in Europe, but because they're fleeing war. So I think the main thing to do is to stop the war and to stop the conflict in the Middle East. At the same time, you can't have one or two countries take all of the immigrants. It has to be shared. And I know that the latest policy of the EU is to try to keep the refugees in a safe place in Turkey, but they have to pay for that. They have to pay. They can't expect Turkey to pay for it all. And I think that's very important. It's not necessary for them, the refugees, should they live in Germany or France or the UK. But the main thing is for this horrible war, this conflict in the Middle East to end.
Da, mulțumesc. Am mai negociat cu echipa excelenței sale. Mai punem două întrebări. Da, domnule Jean.
Thank you very much. For us, it's a great honor. I'm the Vice Dean of the Faculty, Christina Jean. You are the third time here at our faculty. Perhaps we'll make a small tradition. We'll meet the third time in the beginning of the winter, perhaps in December, after the results of the election campaign in the United States and the Republic of Moldova. We will discuss the results of the election campaign. Perhaps we will discuss the perspective of bilateral relations between the Republic of Moldova and the United States after significant changes in political system. I have two questions for you, if it's possible to address. One question is a personal one, perhaps very interesting for our students. You are a career diplomat. What is your key formula of success? What qualities must possess a good diplomat, a good representative of a state? And the second question, if it's possible, I would like to continue idea of our students. Already was addressed a question to you. We discussed already the chances of Hillary Clinton to become a president of the United States. How you would like to judge the perspective or possibilities of a woman to be a president of a superpower? I think there is an opinion that is commonly accepted that a woman is weaker than a man. She is influenced by the feelings in the decision process. How do you think? What are the possibilities of a woman to be a president of a superpower? Perhaps chief of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Okay, so your first question on, I guess, on a diplomatic career. It's interesting, and I think it's very important for all of your students to know that in our foreign service, which is very competitive, you have to take a written exam, you have to take an oral exam, you have to have security clearance and everything. There are actually no requirements other than two. You must be 21 years old, and you must be an American citizen. This surprises a lot of people, and they say, well, don't you need a college education? Don't you have to study international relations? The answer is no. When you go through this process, they will listen to what you have to say. A lot of people know things. A lot of people have interpersonal qualities that make them a good diplomat, even without the formal education. Now, in general, it's very useful if you have a background in international relations. I studied international relations when I was in university. So it is very helpful, but it's not a requirement. Once you're in the Foreign Service, in terms of progress, I think a lot of it has to do with how you deal with people, particularly in diplomacy. The ability to communicate, to know foreign languages, to be able to defend your country's policies even if you don't agree with them or if there's just a lot of criticism. So it's something that evolves. I like to think I'm more mature than I was when I came. I was 24 years old when I came into the Foreign Service. So, and the world has changed a lot. On your second question about Hillary Clinton, about women leaders, I would just point out some examples. I don't think anyone thought that Margaret Thatcher was weak. I think she was viewed as very, very strong, both domestically and internationally. Madeleine Albright, who was one of our secretaries of state, she was the one responsible for the bombing, the NATO bombing in Belgrade. Okay, so it doesn't always mean, you know, that a woman leader is going to be weak. I think that I've dealt with lots of women in government, and fortunately more and more are coming into government. I really don't find them any less strong than the men. I do think there are lots of psychological articles written about the difference between if women ran a government or if men ran a government in terms of negotiation style and the ability to compromise. I'll leave that to the psychologists. I don't know.
Excellency, but we have your promise to meet at the beginning of December, our third meeting.
I am happy to come back here anytime I am invited.
Știu că mai aveți multe întrebări, dar asta este un motiv pentru excelența sa să mai revină la FRIșPA pentru a răspunde tuturor întrebărilor. Acum este o rugăminte față de toți, facem o poză de grup împreună cu excelența sa. Mulțumim foarte mult. Aici, aici.